Nicole Kidman has made her first public appearance since her split from Keith Urban.
We've been through a lot together.
We've got a timeline for it now, and the time it's now.
When the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, Keith Urban sat alone, guitar in hand, eyes distant, the echo of applause fading into silence. To the world, he was still the smiling country star, the man who'd built his career on hope, love, and redemption. But behind the carefully polished smile was a man who had lived through storms the public never truly saw. The tabloids had written their versions of the story. Keith and Nicole, a love torn apart. But none of them ever captured the truth. What really ended their fairy tale romance wasn't fame or distance. It was the invisible weight of two worlds that could never quite fit together. In a rare, soul-bearing interview after the divorce, Keith didn't hold back. He didn't speak in anger, he spoke in honesty. He revealed what it was really like to love someone who lived half her life behind a camera lens. He confessed the toll that perfection, pressure, and pride took on their marriage. And most shockingly, he admitted that sometimes love isn't destroyed by hate, but by silence. What he said next would leave the audience in stunned silence, because for the first time, Keith Urban exposed not just what ended his marriage, but the painful truth about what Hollywood demands from those who dare to love within it. This is the story of how two stars, bound by destiny and divided by fame, found themselves standing on opposite sides of their own dreams. Long before the heartbreak and the headlines, Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman's love story began like a scene from a movie. Two global icons, one from the rugged heart of country music, the other from the polished world of Hollywood, collided at the perfect moment. It was 2005, and both were standing at the peak of their careers. Keith, the charismatic musician from Australia, had just become a Nashville legend. Nicole, fresh off her Oscar win, had finally found peace after a long, complicated journey through fame. They met at a gala in Los Angeles, a brief handshake, a quiet conversation, and then something clicked. To outsiders, it looked like another celebrity romance, but for them it was real. When she smiled at me, Keith would later recall, it felt like the noise of the world disappeared. Within months, the tabloids were buzzing. Fans called them the perfect couple, but behind the perfection was a growing pressure. Nicole was used to living under the microscope, the constant scrutiny of red carpets and interviews. Keith, meanwhile, came from the world of smoky bars, guitars, and open honesty. "We came from different planets," he once said. She knew how to survive in fame. I was still learning how not to drown in it. As their love deepened, so did their challenges. Nicole's career often meant long months away, shooting on distant sets. Keith's tours kept him moving from city to city. They tried to stay connected, late-night calls, love letters, surprise visits. But time has a cruel way of eroding even the strongest bonds. Distance doesn't break love, Keith once confessed. It just makes silence louder. When they finally married in 2006, it was a beautiful candlelit ceremony in Sydney, heartfelt, pure, and deeply emotional. For a moment, it seemed like they had conquered the odds. Nicole often said that Keith saved her. But privately, Keith worried he couldn't live up to the image of the perfect husband to a Hollywood icon. He adored her ambition, her discipline, her elegance. But there were nights when he felt invisible, when the man who had once commanded stadiums felt like a ghost in his own home. She was chasing roles, he later admitted, and I was chasing her shadow. Friends noticed the subtle changes, Keith writing darker songs, Nicole appearing alone at events. Behind every smile, there was distance. They both loved deeply but communicated poorly. Fame had built a wall neither of them knew how to climb. Keith's struggles with inner demons, the kind he had battled for years, only added to the strain. "When I felt the cracks in our marriage," he said softly, "I didn't reach for help. I reached for the music." It was during this period that he began writing songs not for the charts, but as letters, messages Nicole might one day understand. By the time their schedules finally aligned again, it wasn't love they were fighting, it was fatigue. "We didn't fall out of love," he explained. "We just got lost in everything that came with being who we were. And yet, for all the tension, Keith never spoke with resentment. "Nicole gave me more love than I knew what to do with," he said years later. But sometimes love alone can't heal what the world breaks. Their story wasn't just about fame. It was about two people trying to keep a spark alive under the harshest lights imaginable. And as that light grew brighter, their private moments grew darker. Because in Hollywood, even love comes with an audience. As the honeymoon phase faded, reality began to seep into Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman's marriage like a slow-moving storm. To the world, they still looked like perfection. The musician with the easy smile and the actress with the golden glow. They walked red carpets hand in hand, gave interviews about love and loyalty, and shared glimpses of their family life that made fans believe they had found something unbreakable. But behind closed doors, the silence grew heavier. Nicole's world was built on schedules, scripts, and expectations. Keith's was driven by music, spontaneity, and emotion. The clash between structure and soul became harder to hide. "We were both trying to live up to an image of each other," Keith said in a later interview. "And in doing that, we forgot how to just be ourselves." Nicole's success continued to soar. Film after film, press tour after press tour. She seemed untouchable, floating through fame with grace. But the more she achieved, the more isolated Keith began to feel. "I used to watch her leave for the airport," he recalled, "and I'd tell myself, this is what love looks like, letting them go chase their dreams. But some days, I'd wonder if she'd ever come back the same." The long separations took their toll. When Nicole was in Europe filming, Keith would pour his loneliness into songwriting sessions that went on until dawn. The lyrics turned darker, the melodies slower. His music, once filled with passion and hope, began to sound like confession. Friends noticed. "He wasn't angry," one close collaborator said. "He was just tired of pretending everything was fine." Rumors began swirling, as they always do in Hollywood. Stories of tension, distance, and heartbreak made their way into gossip columns. Keith tried to ignore them, but the pressure became suffocating. "You stop trying to convince the world that you're okay," he said. "You just hope the person you love still believes in you." What hurt him most wasn't betrayal, it was indifference. He once described sitting at home watching one of Nicole's interviews, where she smiled as if everything was perfect. "She looked happy," he said quietly. "But I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her smile like that around me." Nicole, for her part, wasn't the villain. She was a woman trapped between her passion for her craft and her need for connection. Nicole wasn't cruel, Keith admitted. She was just lost in her own world, the same way I was lost in mine. Both were victims of ambition, caught in a love that couldn't survive the lives they'd built before each other. Their rare public appearances became exercises in performance. Every touch, every glance, every forced laugh, it all became a role they had to play. "We weren't lying," Keith said. "We were just protecting something fragile." The breaking point came quietly. No shouting, no scandal. Just distance. The kind of distance you can't measure in miles, only in moments missed. One day, Keith came home from tour to find her script notes on the table. Her schedule pinned to the fridge, and a note that simply read, "We'll talk when I'm back." She never said what she meant by that, but he understood. She didn't need to say the words, he later said. Sometimes silence says it all. That night, Keith went into his studio and played until his fingers bled. He didn't write a song for the charts or the fans. He wrote one for himself. The words were raw, stripped of metaphor. "I gave you my voice, you gave me your light, and somewhere in between, we both lost sight." It was the song of a man who loved deeply and lost quietly. And though the world would never hear that version, it marked the moment Keith realized the truth. Love can survive fame, but it can't survive the loneliness fame brings with it. Months passed after the divorce papers were signed. Yet the silence surrounding Keith Urban spoke louder than any statement could. Fans waited for bitterness, for a tell-all interview, for a song that would scorch the earth. But Keith remained quiet. He didn't point fingers or make accusations. Instead, he disappeared into his music, letting melodies speak where words might wound. But eventually, Silence became its own kind of prison. During an intimate sit-down interview years later, Keith finally decided to speak, not to blame, but to be free. He looked calm, even grateful, but his voice trembled with honesty. "People think a divorce is just about two people falling out of love," he began. "But it's more about the parts of yourself you lose trying to keep someone else happy." He revealed what the world never saw, that behind every red carpet photo was a quiet struggle between identity and image. "When you love someone who lives under the world's microscope, you start living under it too," he said, "and you forget what's real." Keith described the subtle ways fame had reshaped their love, the small compromises, the unspoken expectations. "She didn't ask me to change," he said softly. "But Hollywood did. Suddenly I wasn't just Keith, I was her husband. Every success I had was framed by her shadow." His tone wasn't resentful. It was reflective. "Nicole taught me a lot about strength," he admitted. "She taught me how to stand tall even when the wind's against you. But somewhere along the way, we stopped standing together." For the first time, Keith opened up about how deeply the pressure to appear perfect had eaten away at them both. "People don't realize that when you're in the spotlight, you start performing even when you're alone," he said. "You smile when you want to scream. You laugh so the world doesn't hear the breaking inside." The interviewer asked if he blamed her. Keith paused for a long moment, then shook his head. "No," he said. "I don't blame her. We both loved each other the best way we knew how. But love isn't enough if you're not growing in the same direction." Then, in what fans would later call his most vulnerable admission, Keith said, "After the divorce, I realized I wasn't angry at Nicole. I was angry at myself for letting the industry teach me that vulnerability was weakness." That statement marked the turning point. For the first time, Keith wasn't the wounded artist or the silent ex-husband. He was a man taking back his truth. He spoke about therapy, rediscovering himself, and how he learned to turn pain into perspective. "I didn't expose Nicole," he said with a faint smile. "I exposed the illusion, the one that says fame and love can coexist without cost." He revealed how he'd begun using his concerts as confessional spaces. Fans noticed it, his voice more emotional, his songs rawer. "I wasn't writing hits anymore," he said. "I was writing healing." One of his newer songs carried a simple refrain that resonated deeply with listeners. "I forgive the silence, I forgive the show, I forgive the love that couldn't grow." It was the sound of closure, gentle, bittersweet, real. By the time the interview ended, the world understood something profound. Keith Urban hadn't exposed Nicole Kidman. He had exposed the painful truth about what fame does to love. His words weren't an attack. They were a mirror held up to every relationship built under the public eye. "If there's one thing I've learned," he said in his closing moments, "it's that the world loves a perfect couple. But perfection isn't love, it's performance. And when the curtain falls, only the truth remains. That truth, honest, humble, and human, became the redemption Keith never knew he needed." In the years that followed his divorce, Keith Urban began to rebuild not his image but his soul. The pain that once haunted his lyrics slowly turned into wisdom. The man who had once stood in the shadow of Hollywood now stood beneath his own light, humble and grounded. "I stopped trying to be understood," he said in one of his later interviews. "I just started trying to understand myself." For Keith, healing didn't happen overnight. It came in quiet waves, late-night studio sessions, long drives through Nashville, and hours of reflection on stages across the world. Every note he played was a piece of forgiveness, every song a step away from the man he used to be. He didn't erase Nicole from his story. He honored her. "She was a chapter," he told a live audience once, his voice soft but steady. "A beautiful, complicated chapter." But the book didn't end there. Those words were met with a standing ovation, not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. Keith's friends noticed the change. The anger had gone. The sadness had transformed into gratitude. He stopped carrying it, one longtime bandmate said. He finally let the past breathe. He spoke often about how love, when it ends, doesn't have to become bitterness. You can't erase someone who helped you grow, he said. Even if the garden doesn't last, the roots still changed you. What surprised many was how open he became about vulnerability. Once guarded, Keith began to use his platform to speak about emotional honesty, about the courage it takes to admit when life breaks you. "We talk about success and fame," he told one crowd in London, "but not about how it feels to lose yourself in them." In one particularly emotional performance, he paused mid-song and said something that would echo across social media. "The real exposure isn't telling the world who hurt you. It's showing them that you healed." Those words became a defining message for fans who had followed his journey from heartbreak to renewal. Keith started writing differently, too. Gone were the anthems about chasing dreams. Now his songs carried a quiet strength, a kind of truth that comes only after pain. One track, "Quiet House," told the story of returning home after love has gone cold, not to mourn it, but to thank it. "Every echo," he said, "reminds me I was lucky enough to have love at all." In his interviews, Keith never painted himself as the victim. "We both made mistakes," he admitted, "but what matters is that we found our way back to ourselves." When asked what he'd say to Nicole today, he smiled and replied, "Thank you for teaching me how to love and how to let go." He began spending more time with family, writing for peace instead of profit, and mentoring young musicians about the realities of fame. "The industry teaches you how to sell emotion," he said, "but nobody teaches you how to survive it." By the time he released his next album, fans could hear the transformation. The songs weren't about heartbreak anymore. They were about clarity, about finding grace in imperfection, about knowing that even broken things can shine. In the final track, "The Man I Am Now," Keith summed up his journey in one verse. "I've walked through silence. I've danced with pain, lost myself just to love again. What I gave away, I found somehow, and I thank the fall for the man I am now." It wasn't a song about regret. It was about rebirth. When asked what he'd learned from everything, Keith gave the simplest answer of all: love doesn't fail. It just teaches. Some lessons hurt, but every one of them saves you in the end. And with that, Keith Urban, the man who had once been broken beneath the weight of fame and love, finally stepped out of the spotlight, not as a star defined by heartbreak, but as a human being defined by peace.